The back cover of this book advertises itself as Japan's most popular shoujo manga, with over 20 million copies sold. But if you had asked me before I had started reading it to tell you anything about this book, I would be unable to do a single thing. I could not tell you this book apart from any others in the lineup, and yet it is obviously incredibly popular. What book am I talking about? Nana by Ai Yazawa. So, what is Nana about? Well, it's the story of a girl named Nana. Only it's not that simple. But let's save the discussion of what this is about for the actual final video. Hi, my name is Steven, but you might better know me by my superhero alter ego, Spike Stonehand. And if you like the work that I'm doing here on this channel, please consider giving me a like, sharing this video with your friends, and subscribing to my channel. All of these are free ways that you can help boost this video's popularity in the YouTube algorithms and across the broader internet. You can also support me over on Patreon, which gets your name thrown at the end of this video, or by reading my blog at spikestonehand.com, where I have new comic buyer's guides and links to cool comics industry news, reviews, interviews, other YouTubes and podcasts that I'm listening to and would love to share the love with. But without further ado, let me welcome you to my channel, Divining Comics, where I explore the magic hidden between the panels of your favorite comics.
Boys and girls, your attention, please. Presenting a new exciting radio program featuring the thrilling adventures of an amazing and incredible personality.
This video is another installment of Manga May. As part of my broader Dividing Comics challenge, where I've picked 52 comics from across the globe and across time in order to expand my knowledge of the breadth and depth of comics as a global and historical art form. I would love for you to participate. You can find a link to the full challenge in the description of this video. Comment below if you are participating, with what comics you're reading, or if you've read Nana before, what your thoughts are. Oh, and there's one thing I should probably address. This isn't my usual place where I film the videos, and this isn't my usual getup for these videos. I normally wear a baseball cap and film in my reading room, but I have just moved. My new house is a mess. I don't know where my baseball caps are. I don't know where my microphone is. I don't have a clean desk that I can put a laptop onto to set up and record this video. So hopefully this will be the last time I'm having to record like this using just my AirPod microphones. I apologize for the audio quality, but it could not be escaped. Let's dig into Nana. So, like I said, Nana tells the story of Nana, a young girl who is constantly falling in love with all of the wrong men. And as she goes off to college with her best friend Junko, she falls in love with perhaps Mr. Right, only this time she wants to be just friends with him. That's only half of the story. Around the halfway point of volume 1, the story switches perspectives completely to a new Nana. And this time, she's a rock star in a metal band who is in love with the bass guitarist of the band, only to have him be poached by a more popular and successful band and given the opportunity of a lifetime to be assigned to a record label. And she has to decide, does she want to follow him and follow her love, or does she want to pursue her own dreams and her own music career? So I think I want to kind of talk about the two separate halves of the story independently, because they are really just two separate halves. Though I think telling the story in this way is an interesting choice by Yazawa, because it takes what could have been a more tropey, trite-filled story and adds a lot of depth and intrigue to it by giving you different perspectives of similar stories, right? I think you might compare it to something like Love Everlasting, drawn by Elsa Chartier and written by Tom King, where you get these kind of different romance comic trope stories throughout time. But taking the individual, perhaps basic story and iterating on it and showing you different examples of it, I think does add a certain depth to the story and explains why perhaps this was so popular. But the first story with the Nana, who is a high school student that's going off to college and falling in love with all of the wrong people. This was definitely the lighter story, and I think that's even evidenced in the bonus material at the end of this first volume, where you have the characters kind of talking about the that the other story is much more popular, is a much better written story than this first one. This Nana is very immature. She falls in love with all the wrong guys, like we said. And there's even a funny sequence in the very beginning of this volume where she adopts the traits of whatever boy she currently is in love with. You know, she'll change her hair to match his style. She'll change her personality, her dress, everything. And I think that it is much more of that kind of younger, lighter-hearted story that it gains depth over time, but it starts off in that kind of, silly, fun, romantic comedy place. And the story is even told in a more lighthearted way. And by that I mean there's lots of pages where there'll be little fourth wall breaking asides or meta jokes or references to the fact that this is a manga, references to other manga by the same author, that kind of keep things light and fun for the most part, especially in this first story. And I think that that really lets you in and invites you in and creates kind of a more comfortable space for the later depth that you get. This Nana is, like I said, comically unaware of how she's being perceived, like almost to an autistic level, right? Where she's unaware of how to function normally in social situations. Her friends are always having to tell her that she's coming off weird, or here's how you should be approaching these things. I think that kind of creates an environment where people that have their anxieties can see themselves in the character of Nana, right? By exaggerating things to this nth degree, somebody that has more mild anxiety could be like, "Oh yeah, I do something similar to that, maybe not in such an extreme and funny way, but I do that kind of thing." I think that that is a good choice for this first story, especially. I do think there's a certain point where Yazawa was maybe less interested in telling a story and wanted to move on to the next one, because there's a certain point where it starts feeling like we're getting whole stories told in montage and fast forward. The characters jump 6 months ahead after they get to college and make their new guy friends to this time that they're on the beach, and then you jump another year or two ahead towards they're considering leaving the end of the semester. Do they want to go to Tokyo? Do they want to stay in this small town that they're in? And it felt very sped up in that sense, and I think that kind of hurt things. That starts off at this very slow pace where you're spending a lot of time on the first day of college. They're meeting these guys for the first time and hanging out with them at their apartment, and I think that those parts were a little bit stronger than this kind of fast forwarded romance development. But it's not a super complex story. Like, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that at least at this point in the narrative, she ends up with the guy that she was interested in, and has a big dramatic moment where she rejects the older man who was maybe taking advantage of her. She was in love with, and he kind of viewed as an object, a sexual plaything. It's your classic kind of coming of age girls' romance story. So there's nothing super shocking there. But I do wish that maybe things were told a little bit more slowly, a little bit with more care, and we weren't jumping so quickly across time. Maybe that one story could have taken up a longer portion of the volume, or you could have began the jumping back and forth a little bit sooner. Speaking of the jumping back and forth, this second Nana story about a different Nana who was someone that struggled growing up economically, and then now she's in a punk rock band. All the people love her. She's the attractive lead of a rock and roll band. I think that's a common trope, and so everyone loves her. I think this story is much more successful, and one of the reasons is because it jumps into the most interesting part of the story. We meet the characters, and they're already in this successful band. It'll flash back to moments of their meeting or forming the band as needed for just a couple pages here and there, but we don't need to see all of that in detail. We get to jump to the more interesting part of the story where she's already dating the guy that she just decided she wants to follow him to Tokyo, or if she wants to stay, where she lives and support her current band. I think that this is one of those stories that works because it is so specific that it taps into universal emotions, right? We've all had these kind of big moments where we have to decide between two things that we want, and there's not really a wrong option. We have to kind of decide for ourselves what the right option will be, and I think that's what's scary about it, right? And what's relatable about it is that if there was an obvious right or wrong choice, then it wouldn't be so interesting of a story. But here we get this complex narrative of, do I fight for my relationship, or do I fight for my career and my dreams and my goals? And there's a specific moment in this story where Nana wants her boyfriend Ren to ask her to join him, to make this kind of big, sweeping romantic gesture. And Ren, on the other hand, wants to give her her freedom. He wants to respect her decisions and not influence her in any way. And neither one of these approaches is necessarily right or wrong, but it is tragic that they're unable to come together to understand what the other person wants in this relationship, and that's ultimately why it ends, right? And I think that that is such a good, powerful choice for a romance story, for a very adult story, that I really found myself enjoying the volume there. And on the artistic level, speaking of this is an adult story, there are a lot of intimate scenes, but it is done in a very tasteful way. Like I would say, you'd have no problem handing this to a teenager that was, mature and could understand these topics without giggling or and being teaky about it. Like this is adult, but it's not salacious. It's not trying to have drawings designed to titillate or arouse. It's trying to just depict the real lives that adult people live and have lived for all of history and all of that complexities. There's some interesting artistic styles. Yazawa has definitely a unique style. She likes these very spindly, long arm, long leg, long torso, almost alien proportion. I think maybe that is something you see a little bit more in these romance comics where they don't have to necessarily fit the normal superhero, like the head is this many body parts tall, that kind of exact proportions. It can be a little more loosey goosey, stylized, exaggerated, and that made for some awkward looking poses, I thought, but ultimately it's not a huge deal. I think that the art is very good, and they feel a little word dense at times at conveying the emotions that everyone's going through in these given moments. So, wrapping things up, would I be interested in reading the story? I'll give this a tentative yes. I think that there's a lot here worth reading, and I would be interested to see just how these stories develop, because at this point I really can't tell. I think that that's interesting. This feels like a very complete volume, largely, even though it's kind of two short stories. Like, do they introduce new nanas? Is that what happens, or do they continue on with these stories of these two nanas that they've introduced at this point? I don't know, and either one of those could be artistically interesting. But I feel very satisfied with the amount of story that I read. I don't feel a burning desire to keep reading more. But what I read was great, and would love to read more if I had the time and the inclination. Who would I recommend this for? Definitely, if you're a teenager or adult interested in women's stories, stories of romance between women and men, and even sometimes women and women, it seems like in these volumes, kind of adult decisions, young adult, really, and I don't mean that in young adult in the sense of teenagers, but, 20 somethings that are making big and bold decisions with their big and bold emotions, that ultimately to their own detriment often. I think that if you like those kinds of stories, this is exactly that, and this would be for you. So thank you for watching. Like I said before, give this video a like and a comment with what your favorite romance manga are and which ones I should check out. But until next time, keep reading comics and never let the magic of comics die.
Old Enoch, he lived to be 365 when the Lord came and took him back to heaven alive. I saw the light from heaven shining all around. I saw the light come shining, I saw that light come down.